Good evening. My name is Rick Ramunno, and I work in the full-time ministry in Denver. And I can relate a lot to you guys. I'm working full-time, in my mid-20s, not married, and I'm going to grad school. And tonight, I want to look at the true message of the gospel, which is the cross. And then Perry is going to help us to see how we should respond to the cross. And I remember studying out this topic for the very first time. I was a 19-year-old freshman in college, had just driven drunk with some friends from a party. I was in this impure relationship. But on the outside, my life looked good. I was leading an ROTC. I was the football captain in high school. But in my heart, it was so messy and I was so jacked up. I remember seeing the cross for the first time that night. And I realized that all the solutions that I had come up with in my life, they were not going to save me. The ways of the world were not going to fix me. And my fake religion would never heal me. I could never do enough good to outdo all the bad. And I was desperately and utterly lost. Here's an unavoidable fact for all of us here. Because of our sin, we deserve hell. We deserve to pay the full price because of our sin, which is death, pain, and suffering. And then God steps in with this heart filled with grief and with love for us. And he offers us grace, forgiveness, healing, and to be made new. But he had to ransom for us the ultimate cost. And that cost was to kill his one and only son. It's the price tag that we were supposed to pay. And that price can best be summed up as pain. We're going to pick up with the emotional pain here in Matthew that Jesus went through on the night he was betrayed. And we're going to be looking at chapters 26 through 27. And at this point, Jesus and his best friends, they had just had this incredible meal together. Jesus had served them in such an amazing way, but he had only just begun to show them the full extent of his love. You see, after 33 years on earth, it was time for Jesus to give everything that he had to give. The night when Jesus was betrayed, we find him in the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus is out there. He's pleading, begging to God for another way. He did not want to go through with what was in store for him. And his best friends, the guys who were supposed to be keeping watch over him as he was crying out to God, they were falling asleep on him. They did not understand the gravity of the situation. And they weren't there for him when he needed them most. And as Jesus finally surrendered all he had to God, Judas came with a mob of guards from the temple. Judas, he was one of Jesus' closest friends. He broke bread with Jesus. Jesus had served him. He saw Jesus literally raise people from the dead. He betrayed Jesus with a holy kiss. A kiss that conveyed loyalty, respect, deep friendship. That's how he was betrayed. Have you ever been betrayed? Then you know the pit that Jesus felt deep in his stomach, the tear that was forming in his eye. And with that, the guard seized Jesus, started tying him up with rope. And then Peter, Jesus' right-hand man, he unsheathed the sword and started trying to kill the guards. And Jesus just calls him out in front of everybody. Peter, this is not how we do it. This isn't how we fight. You walked with me for years. You know this. And then all the disciples, Jesus' closest friends, they scatter. They leave Jesus when he needed them the most. The guards led Jesus before the whole Sanhedrin, where he would undergo 6 different trials throughout the entire night. And he took these trials on with no sleep, no water, no food, while they were beating him, trying to do everything they could to break him. Jesus was surrounded by enemies, people who he condemned in front of the masses in Jerusalem, the ones who followed him around for years, trying to catch him in what he said, trying to plot ways to murder him. They finally had him. And so what did they do during these court cases? They spat on him. They blindfolded him, beat him, punched him. Prophesy, Messiah, who hit you? By the time that morning came, Jesus' appearance was already so disfigured. beyond that of any human being. His nose was broken, his eyes were black, his face was bruised and swollen, and it was only just the beginning. Jesus was led before the governor, Pontius Pilate, and Pilate provided an ultimatum for the people. Even he, a Roman political leader, he knew that Jesus was completely innocent. So he proposed that the people choose between Jesus and Barabbas. Barabbas was a thug, a murderer, a crook, a rebel against the Romans. He was deserving of the cross. But then on the other side of the stage, you had Jesus, the one who brought life to so many people, gave his heart to people, defended the defenseless, spoke up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. He was the perfect example of what a man is supposed to be. And Pilate stands up there and he says, "Which of these two do you want me to release for you?" To Pilate's surprise, the people shout, "Barabbas! We want Barabbas!" Barabbas stands there and he raises his head, stunned. His jaw drops and he slowly makes his way off the stage, leaving Jesus over there all alone. And with that, Jesus' sentence was sealed. They took him and they flogged him. During a flogging, the Romans would place this pole in the middle of a town square where they would tie criminals in front of everybody. They would get these flexible wooden rods and they would smack the victim to warm them up, to create bruising, to get blood to rise to the surface, so that by the time anything sharp touched it, it exploded and blood sprayed everywhere. The device of choice after that was a cat of nine tails, a flagrum. And it was this rod with 9 ropes on the end. And in these ropes was tied anything sharp, glass, chicken beak, fishing hooks, anything that would penetrate the skin and rip it. As they tied Jesus down to this pole, 2 soldiers took their places on either side of him. And it was their sole job in the army to bring a man as close to death as possible without killing him. Their job was to create this spectacle for the whole community, to get somebody to scream, to beg, to go unconscious, to spasm, to make the body go into shock. They wanted to make sure nobody in the audience would ever think twice about rebelling against Rome. Everything from the back of his neck to the bottom of his ankles was fair game. They were given the green light from their captain, and they commenced the flogging. Each crack of the whip for every one of your sins, the lust, the pride, the jealousy, the hatred, the greed, every whip for every sin. When he was done, his back was nothing but exposed muscle and tendon, and it was hamburger meat. And the crowd had a hard time looking at this Jesus of Nazareth, who was a complete bloody mess by this point. And yet there was still so much more in Jesus' cup for him to drink. The soldiers took him into their quarters to prepare him for crucifixion. They ripped his clothes off, ripping open the wounds on Jesus' back that the clothing had meshed in with, shooting surreal pain throughout his body. They tossed him around amongst each other, and they took turns bowing down and worshiping, "Hail, the King of the Jews!" Spat on his face. They assembled this crown made out of thorns that were a couple inches long, and they set it on his head, and they drove it in deep into his skull by hitting him with a rod. And all the bruising that Jesus had experienced, it broke it open, and blood just streamed down his face, where all Jesus could see was red. Next, Jesus was dragged out in front of the crowds. And just put yourself in Jesus' position here. You're dehydrated, sleep deprived, in and out of consciousness, beaten to a bloody pulp, and you've lost so much blood. Just standing up, it takes everything that you have. But you still got to walk 1.5 miles to this trash dump where the crucifixion would take place. Soldiers catch you as you walk and start to pass out. They whip you every time you slow down. And after what seems like hours, Jesus finally arrives. The cross is laid on the ground in front of the Messiah. They point to where he wants him to lay. And then they stretch Jesus out on this cross. They drive a spike through both radial nerves in his wrist. And if you drive a spike through the radial nerve, you got incredible spasming, pain shooting everywhere. You're just up there seizing. They cross his ankles. They drive a spike through the ankles, through all that tendon, ligament, bone. So Jesus is there on the ground, writhing in pain. And they start to hoist the cross up. And he starts to feel the pressure go from his back to the places where he's been pierced. And the Romans would dig this hole for the cross to sink into deep enough so that as the cross sunk into the ground, a man's shoulders would dislocate on impact. So it sinks in, his shoulders dislocate, and Jesus is finally up on the cross. And the only way for him to take a breath is to pull himself up, where he has been pierced through his nerves, through his ankles, just to take a breath. And the worst part of the cross is the pain flooding through your nervous system. And all you want is for it to be over. You just want a way out. You want to die, but you can't die. No matter what you do, it goes on. And on top of that, there were some important people watching this whole process go down. His best friends were mortified watching their king suffer, the one who they had given up everything to follow. His mom's there watching her son suffer. Can you imagine your mom watching you scream and shake violently on a cross? Can you think of anything worse for a mother to experience? And they're not the only ones who showed up. The priests, the Pharisees, his enemies showed up to nullify his name, to cuss him out. It wasn't enough that he was going to die. They wanted to ridicule him even when he was going through the worst suffering a man could go through. Hours later, we find Jesus at his absolute worst moment. In his most dire time of need, the Father turned his back on the Son when he needed him the most. And the reason that God turned his face from Jesus was so that he who had sin could become sin, so that we would have a chance to overcome all the darkness in our lives. So that all the lies that you've told, your swig of the bottle, your one-night stands, your hours of pornography, your selfish pride, binge-watching Netflix, your addiction to social media, your slander, and your gossip, so that all of it could be forgiven. And in that moment, a violent earthquake started, and the ground shook. Dead people rose from the grave inside of everyone in the city. And the temple curtain was torn in two as thousands of years of the Jewish sacrificial system was paid in full. Why the cross? Why this gruesome glory slaughtering of the perfect man? Because that's how gory, messy, and disgusting your sin is. And it can only be matched by something more horrifying, which is the cross. This crazy amount of sacrifice and love displayed on the cross, it demands a response from you and from me. God is sitting on the edge of his seat, his throne up in heaven right now, wondering, what are you going to choose? What are you going to do? Will you let this incredible act of love change, rearrange your entire life? Or will you walk away sad, missing out on all that God has to offer you? The choice is yours. Now Perry is going to show us how to respond.